Hey, y'all. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Happy Monday, y'all. Happy Monday. Make sure y'all come in. Make sure y'all heart this live, share this live out. Welcome to Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Dr. Joe Dispenza, the spiritual book reading that we have every Monday night. And if not, you all know why. I let you know. This is what we are reading. This is what the book looks like by Dr. Joe Dispenza. We are currently about to start chapter 5. So if you have a copy of the hard book, it'll be on page 97. It is called Survival versus Creation. Okay. So I am so excited to hop into this new chapter. So far, we've talked about overcoming your body. We talked about how your mind and your feelings, your mindset, all of those things, your emotions, all of those work together as far as the things that you want to change in your life. We talked about how to stop living in the past. Basically, when things are happening over and over again, that is because you are living in the past and not living in the future or that present moment. So, this book so far is definitely a game changer. I'm glad that we started with this book. For those of you who do not know me and you are just joining this live, my name is Felicia Carter with Lioness Creation Designs, Bye Bye Belly, Heal Baby, Spiritual Growth Podcast, and this book reading session that we do. Um, I am so excited to be doing this. I love reading, but I also love educating others and also reading with others as well. Doing book clubs is something that I always wanted to do. I did have a mini book club last year, I think, or maybe 2 years ago. I don't remember. But being able to do a spiritual book reading is definitely more my speed. When I was doing the book club, I had just really started my spiritual journey, and the books that we were reading were kind of somewhat interesting, but not really what I um, thought it would be, because I used to read, like certain type of books before, and thinking that I was going to be as interested as I was before in the books, and not being as interested in the urban, the romance and the all of those type books. I wasn't as interested. So nice. This book changed a lot of me and my life. I definitely can believe that, because so far, just what I'm reading, in this book is definitely life changing. Like, even, just being on chapter 5 of this book, and I have started to see that, I think about the things that I have been through, and I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna, think that way anymore. Especially, I don't know if you have been on any of these live sessions that I've been doing, or seen any of the pre-recorded sessions that I had, but um, you know, I had this thing like going over bridges. I'm scared of heights. I had a, and I had an accident in the rain once, and it, kind of changed everything for me, because I had really bad anxiety driving in the rain. And so um driving over a bridge every day in the rain and stuff, it was kind of hard in the beginning. But I realized that is because I have been living in the past. Um and, so lately, just even since starting this book, I have not been feeling that anxiety. Really working on that part of myself has really, really changed a lot of that. Thank you so much. Yes, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Dr. Joe Dispenza is also in the scrolling banner at the bottom. We're on chapter 5, Survival versus Creation is where we'll be starting from. If you do not have the book, you can get the book on Amazon. You can get the book on Audible. You can get the book on Spotify if you have the premium membership. They have audiobooks on there as well. Yes, Atomic Habits is also a great book as well. Yes, welcome, y'all. Please, please make sure that you do me a favor. You heart this live and you share this live out because I do want other people to be able to, if they have not heard of this book as well, they'll be able to, tap back in and hit the replay. Also, when I got my book, I actually got my book from a thrift store. And that's why you see the $2.98. I got the book for $2.98. I definitely would have paid the $17 for this book though. The book is only $17. I definitely would have paid the full $17 for this book. So it's definitely worth it. Amazon, Audible, Spotify, the premium membership, and any thrift store or even a bookstore, you should be able to find this book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Dr. Joe Dispenza. So let's go ahead and hop into it. I have since stopped reading because myself out loud because I have Spotify and the audiobook reading was coming out a lot better, and also so that I don't have to talk the whole time. And I can actually listen is why I started doing the audiobook play. So I'm going to play the audio while I follow along in the book, and you can do the same if you'd like. If you all have any questions during the session, I will go ahead and I will see your question. I'll be checking the comment section. I'll check your question and then I'll try to answer it at the end when we finish. So we're going to try to finish chapter 5, and then next week we can start with chapter 6. If anything changes, I will let you know.
To 5. Survival versus creation. In the last chapter, I purposely used the example of my writing to illustrate my point about transcending the big three. Because when you write, you are creating words, whether on the physical page or in a digital document. The same creativity is operating when you paint, play a musical instrument, turn wood on a lathe, or engage in any other activity that has the effect of breaking the bonds that the big three hold over you. Why is it so hard to live in these creative moments? If we focus on an unwanted past or a dreaded future, that means we live mostly in stress, in survival mode. Whether we're obsessing over our health, the survival of the body, paying our mortgage, the survival need for shelter from our external environment, or having enough time to do what we need to do to survive, most of us are much more familiar with the addictive state of mind we'll call survival than we are with living as creators. In my first book, I went into great detail about the difference between living in survival versus living in creation. So for a fuller explanation of this difference, you may want to read chapters 8 through 11 in Evolve Your Brain. In the pages that follow, I'm going to briefly outline the difference between the two. Think of life in survival mode by picturing an animal such as a deer contentedly grazing in the forest. Let's assume that it is in homeostasis, in perfect balance. But if it perceives some danger in the outside world, say a predator, its fight or flight nervous system gets turned on. This sympathetic nervous system is part of the autonomic nervous system, which maintains the body's automatic functions, such as digestion, temperature regulation, blood sugar levels, and the like. To prepare the animal to deal with the emergency it has detected, the body is chemically altered. The sympathetic nervous system automatically activates the adrenal glands to mobilize enormous amounts of energy. If the deer is chased by a pack of coyotes, it utilizes that energy to flee. If it is nimble enough to get away unharmed, then perhaps after 15 to 20 minutes, when the threat is no longer present, the animal resumes grazing, its internal balance restored. We humans have the same system in place. When we perceive danger, our sympathetic nervous system is turned on, energy is mobilized, and so on, in much the same way as the deer. During early human history, this wonderfully adaptive response helped us to confront threats from predators and other risks to our survival. Those animal qualities served us well for our evolution as a species. Unfortunately, there are several differences between Homo sapiens and our planetary cohabitants in the animal kingdom that don't serve us well. Every time we knock the body out of chemical balance, that's called stress. The stress response is how the body innately responds when it's knocked out of balance, and what it does to return back to equilibrium. Whether we see a lion in the Serengeti, bump into our not-so-friendly ex at the grocery store, or freak out in freeway traffic because we're late for a meeting, we turn on the stress response because we are reacting to our external environment. Unlike animals, we have the ability to turn on the fight or flight response by thought alone. And that thought doesn't have to be about anything in our present circumstances. We can turn on that response in anticipation of some future event. Even more disadvantageous, we can produce the same stress response by revisiting an unhappy memory that is stitched into the fabric of our gray matter. So either we anticipate stress response producing experiences, or we recollect them. Our bodies are either existing in the future or in the past. To our detriment, we turn short-term stressful situations into long-term ones. On the other hand, as far as we can tell, animals don't have the ability, or should I say disability, to turn on the stress response so frequently and so easily that they can't turn it off. That deer, back to happily grazing, isn't consumed with thoughts about what just happened a few minutes ago, let alone the time a coyote chased it 2 months ago. This kind of repetitive stress is harmful to us because no organism was designed with a mechanism to deal with negative effects on the body when the stress response is turned on with great frequency and for long duration. In other words, no creature can avoid the consequences of living in long-term emergency situations. When we turn on the stress response and can't turn it off, we're headed for some type of breakdown in the body. Let's say you keep turning on the fight or flight system due to some threatening circumstance in your life, real or imagined. As your racing heart pumps enormous amounts of blood to your extremities, and your body is knocked out of homeostasis, you're becoming prepared by the nervous system to run or fight. But let's face it, you can't flee to the Bahamas, nor can you throttle your fellow employee. That would be primitive. So as a consequence, you condition your heart to race all the time, and you may be headed for high blood pressure, arrhythmias, and so on. And what's in store when you keep mobilizing all that energy for some emergency situation? If you're putting the bulk of your energy towards some issue in your external environment, there will be little left for your body's internal environment. Your immune system, which monitors your inner world, can't keep up with the lack of energy for growth and repair. Therefore, you get sick. whether it be from a cold, cancer, or rheumatoid arthritis. All are immune-mediated conditions. When you think about it, the real difference between animals and ourselves is that although we both experience stress, humans re-experience and pre-experience traumatic situations. What is so harmful about having our stress response triggered by pressures from the past, present, and future? When we get knocked out of chemical balance so often, eventually that out of balance state becomes the norm. As a result, we are destined to live our genetic destiny, and in most cases, that means suffering from some illness. The reason is clear. The domino effect from the cascade of hormones and other chemicals we release in response to stress can dysregulate some of our genes, and that may create disease. In other words, repeated stress pushes the genetic buttons that cause us to begin to head towards our genetic destiny. So what was once very adaptive behavior and a beneficial biochemical response, fight or flight, has become a highly maladaptive and harmful set of circumstances. For instance, when a lion was chasing your ancestors, the stress response was doing what it was designed to do, protect them from their outer environment. That's adaptive. But if for days on end you fret about your promotion, over-focus on your presentation to upper management, or worry about your mother being in the hospital, these situations create the same chemicals as though you were being chased by a lion. Now that's maladaptive. You're staying too long in emergency mode. Fight or flight is using up the energy your internal environment needs. Your body is stealing this vital energy from your immune, digestive, and endocrine systems, among others, and directing it to the muscles that you'd use to fight a predator or run from danger. But in your situation, that's only working against you. From a psychological perspective, overproduction of stress hormones creates the human emotions of anger, fear, envy, and hatred, incites feelings of aggression, frustration, anxiety, and insecurity, and causes us to experience pain, suffering, sadness, hopelessness, and depression. Most people spend the majority of their time preoccupied with negative thoughts and feelings. Is it likely that most of the things that are happening in our present circumstances are negative? Obviously not. Negativity runs so high because we are either living in anticipation of stress or re-experiencing it through a memory. So most of our thoughts and feelings are driven by those strong hormones of stress and survival. When our stress response is triggered, we focus on three things, and they are of highest importance. 1, the body. It must be taken care of. 2, the environment. Where can I go to escape this threat? 3, time. How much of it do I have to use in order to evade this threat? Living in survival is the reason why we human beings are so dominated by the big three. The stress response and the hormones that it triggers force us to focus on and obsess about the body, the environment, and time. As a result, we begin to define our self within the confines of the physical realm. We become less spiritual, less conscious, less aware, and less mindful. Put another way, we grow to be materialists. That is, habitually consumed by thoughts of things in the external environment. Our identity becomes wrapped up in our bodies. We are absorbed by the outer world because that is what those chemicals force us to pay attention to. Things we own, people we know, places we have to go, problems we face, hairstyles we dislike, our body parts, our weight, our looks in comparison to others, how much time we have or don't have. You get the picture. And we remember who we are based primarily on what we know and the things we do. Living in survival causes us to focus on the 0.00001% instead of the 99.99999% of reality. Most of us embrace the traditional notion of ourselves as a somebody, but who we are has nothing to do with the big three. Who we are is consciousness connected to a quantum field of intelligence. When we become this somebody, this materialistic physical self living in survival, we forget who we truly are. We become disconnected and feel separate from the universal field of intelligence. The more we live impacted by stress hormones, the more their chemical rush becomes our identity. If we fancy ourselves solely physical beings, we limit ourselves to perceiving only with our physical senses. The more we use our senses to define our reality, the more we allow our senses to determine our reality. We slip into that Newtonian mode of thinking, which locks us into trying to predict the future based on some past experience. If you recall, the Newtonian model of reality is all about predicting an outcome. Now we are trying to control our reality instead of surrendering to something greater. All we're doing is trying to survive. If the quantum model of reality ultimately defines everything as energy, why do we experience ourselves more as physical beings than as beings of energy? We could say that the survival-orientated emotions are energy in motion, are lower frequency or lower energy emotions. They vibrate at a slower wavelength and therefore ground us into being physical. We become denser, heavier, and more corporeal because that energy causes us to vibrate more slowly. The body quite literally becomes composed of more mass and less energy. More matter, less mind. Refer to figure 5A, survival emotions versus elevated emotions. So it might make sense that if we inhibit our more primitive survival emotions and begin to break our addiction to them, our energy will be higher in frequency and less likely to root us to the body. In a way, we can liberate energy from the body when the body has become the mind into the quantum field. As our emotions become more elevated, we will naturally ascend to a higher level of consciousness, closer to source, and feel more connected to universal intelligence. When the stress response is turned on, whether in response to a real or conjured up threat, a powerful cascade of chemicals rushes into our system and gives us a strong jolt of energy, momentarily waking up our bodies and certain parts of the brain to put all of our attention on the big three. This is very addictive to us because it's like drinking a triple espresso. We get turned on for a few moments. In time, we unconsciously become addicted to our problems, our unfavorable circumstances, our unhealthy relationships. We keep these situations in our lives to feed our addiction to survival-orientated emotions, so that we can remember who we think we are as a somebody. We just love the rush of energy we get from our troubles. Moreover, we also associate this emotional high with every person, thing, place, and experience in our outer world that is known and familiar. We become addicted to these elements in our environment as well. We embrace our environment as our identity. If you agree that we can turn on the stress response just by thinking, then it stands to reason that we can get the same rush of addictive stress chemicals as if we were being chased by a predator. As a consequence, we become addicted to our very thoughts. They begin to give us an unconscious adrenaline high, and we find it very hard to think differently. To think greater than how we feel, or to think outside of the proverbial box becomes just too uncomfortable. The moment we begin to deny ourselves the substance we're addicted to, in this case, the familiar thoughts and feelings associated with our emotional addiction, there are cravings, withdrawal pains, and a host of inner sub-vocalizations, urging us not to change. And so we remain chained to our familiar reality. Thus, our thoughts and feelings, which are predominantly self-limiting, hook us back to all the problems, conditions, stresses, and bad choices that produce the fight or flight effect in the first place. We keep all these negative stimuli around us so that we can produce the stress response, because that addiction reinforces the idea of who we are, only serving to reaffirm our own personal identity. Simply put, most of us are addicted to the problems and conditions of our lives that produce stress. No matter whether we're in a bad job or a bad relationship, we hold our troubles close to us because they help reinforce who we are as a somebody. They feed our addictions to lower frequency emotions. Most harmful of all, we live in fear that if those problems were taken away, we wouldn't know what to think, how to feel, and we wouldn't get to experience the rush of energy that causes us to remember who we are. For most of us, God forbid we not be a somebody. How awful would it be to be a nobody, to not have an identity? As you can see, what we identify as ourself exists within the context of our collective emotional association with our thoughts and feelings, our problems, and all those elements of the big three. Is it any wonder that people find it so hard to go within and leave this self-produced reality behind? How would we know who we are if it weren't for our environment, our bodies, and time? That's why we are so dependent upon the external world. We limit ourselves to using our senses to define and cultivate emotions, so that we can receive the physiological feedback that reaffirms our own personal addictions. We do all this to feel human. When our survival response is way out of proportion to what is happening in our outer world, that excess of stress response hormones causes us to become fixated within the parameters of self. So we become overly selfish. We obsess about our bodies or a particular aspect of our environment, and we live enslaved to time. We're trapped in this particular reality, and we feel powerless to change, to break the habit of being ourselves. These excessive survival emotions tip the scales of a healthy ego, the self we consciously refer to when we say I. When the ego is in check, its natural job is to make sure we are protected and safe in the outer world. As an example, the ego makes sure we stay far away from a bonfire or a few steps away from the cliff's edge. When the ego is balanced, its natural instinct is self-preservation. There's a healthy balance between its needs and those of others, its attention to itself and to others. When we're in survival mode in an emergency situation, it makes sense that the self should take priority. But when chronic, long-term stress chemicals push the body and brain out of balance, the ego becomes over-focused on survival and puts the self first to the exclusion of anything else. We're selfish all the time. Thus, we become self-indulgent, self-centered, and self-important, full of self-pity and self-loathing. When the ego is under constant stress, it's got a me first priority. Under those circumstances, the ego is primarily concerned with predicting every outcome of every situation because it is overly focused on the outer world and feels completely separated from the 99.99999% of reality. In fact, the more we define reality through our senses, the more this reality becomes our law. And material reality as law is the very opposite of the quantum law. Whatever we place our awareness on is our reality. Consequently, if our attention is focused on the body and our physical realm, and if we become locked into a particular line of linear time, then this becomes our reality. To forget about the people we know, the problems we have, the things we own, and the places we go. To lose track of time, to go beyond the body and its need to feed its habituations, to give up the high from emotionally familiar experiences that reaffirm the identity, to detach from trying to predict a future condition or review a past memory, to lay down the selfish ego that is only concerned with its needs, to think or dream greater than how we feel and crave the unknown. This is the beginning of freedom from our present lives. Let's go one step further. I explained earlier that we can turn on the stress response by thought alone. I also mentioned the scientific fact that the chemicals associated with stress pull the genetic trigger by creating a very harsh environment outside of ourselves, and thus creating disease. So, by pure reason, our thoughts can actually make us sick. If our thoughts can make us sick, might they also make us well? Let's say that a person has had some experiences within a short time frame that caused him to feel resentful. As a result of his unconscious reactions to those occurrences, he held on to his bitterness. Chemicals corresponding to this emotion flooded his cells. Over weeks, his emotion turned into a mood, which continued for months and changed into a temperament, which was sustained for years and formed a strong personality trait called resentment. In fact, he memorized this emotion so well that the body knew resentment better than the conscious mind, because he remained in a cycle of thinking and feeling and thinking that way for years. Based on what you learned about emotions as being the chemical signature of an experience, wouldn't you agree that as long as this person clings to resentment, his body will react as though it is still experiencing the long ago events that first caused him to embrace this emotion? Moreover, if the body's reaction to those chemicals of resentment disrupted the functions of certain genes, and this sustained reaction kept signaling the same genes to respond in the same way, might the body eventually develop a physical condition, such as cancer? If so, is it possible that once he unmemorized the emotion of continuous resentment, by no longer thinking the thoughts that created the feelings of resentment, and vice versa, his body, as the unconscious mind, would be free from that emotional enslavement? In time, would he stop signaling the genes the same way? And finally, let's say he began thinking and feeling in new ways, to such a degree that he invented a new ideal for himself, related to a new personality. As he moved into a new state of being, might he signal his genes in beneficial ways and condition the body into an elevated emotional state, ahead of the actual experience of good health? Could he do this to the extent that the body would begin to change by thought alone? What I just described in simple terms happened to a student in one of my seminars who overcame cancer. Bill, 57, was a roofing contractor. A lesion had appeared on his face, and a dermatologist diagnosed malignant melanoma. Although Bill underwent surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy, the cancer recurred in his neck, then his side, and finally his calf. Each time he underwent a similar course of treatment. Naturally, Bill experienced why me moments. He understood that his excessive sun exposure was a risk factor, but he knew others who had been similarly exposed and didn't develop cancer. He fixated on that unfairness. After treatment for the same cancer on his left flank, Bill pondered whether his own thoughts, emotions, and behaviors had contributed to his condition. In a moment of self-reflection, he realized that for more than 30 years, he had been stuck in resentment thinking and feeling that he always had to give up what he wanted for the sake of others. For example, he had wanted to become a professional musician after high school, but when an injury left his father unable to work, Bill had to join his family's roofing company. He habitually re-experienced his feelings upon being told he had to give up his aspirations, to the extent that his body still lived in that past. This also set up a pattern of dreams deferred. Whenever something didn't go his way, such as the housing market collapsing just after he expanded the business, he always found someone or something to blame. Bill had so memorized the emotional response pattern of bitterness that it dominated his personality and became an unconscious program. His state of being had signaled the same genes for so long that they had created the disease that now afflicted him. No longer could Bill allow his environment to control him. The people, places, and influences in his life had always dictated how he thought, felt, and behaved. He sensed that to break the bonds with his old self and reinvent a new one, he would have to leave his familiar environment. So for 2 weeks in Baja, Mexico, he retreated from his familiar life. The first 5 mornings, Bill contemplated how he thought when he felt resentment. He became a quantum observer of his thoughts and feelings. He became conscious of his unconscious mind. Next, he paid attention to his previously unconscious behaviors and actions. He decided to halt any thought, behavior, or emotion that was unloving towards himself. After the first week of this vigilance, Bill felt free because he had liberated his body from its emotional addiction to resentment. By inhibiting the familiar thoughts and feelings that had driven his behaviors, in a sense, he impeded the signals of the survival emotions from conditioning his body to the same mind. His body then released energy, which was available to use to design a new destiny for himself. For the next week, Bill became so uplifted that he thought about the new self he wanted to be and how he would respond to the people, places, and influences that previously controlled him. For instance, he decided that whenever his wife and kids expressed a wish or need, he would respond with kindness and generosity instead of making them feel like a burden. In short, he focused on how he wanted to think, act, and feel when presented with situations that had challenged him in the past. He was creating a new personality, a new mind, and a new state of being. Bill began to put into practice what he'd placed in his mind while sitting on that Baja beach. Shortly after his return, he noticed that the tumor on his calf had fallen off. In a week or so, when he went to his doctor, he was cancer-free. He has remained that way. By firing his brain in new ways, Bill changed biologically and chemically from his previous self. As a result, he signaled new genes in new ways, and those cancer cells couldn't coexist with his new mind, new internal chemistry, and new self. Once trapped by the emotions of the past, he now lives in a new future. At the end of the previous chapter, I briefly described what it is like to live in creative mode. Those are the moments of being fully engaged and in flow, so that the environment, the body, and time all seem immaterial and don't invade our conscious thoughts. Living in creation is living as a nobody. Ever notice that when you're truly in the midst of creating anything, you forget about yourself? You disassociate from your known world. You are no longer a somebody who associates your identity with certain things you own, particular people you know, certain tasks you do, and different places you lived at specific times. You could say that when you are in a creative state, you forget about the habit of being you. You lay down your selfish ego and become selfless. You have moved beyond space and time and become pure, immaterial awareness. Once you're no longer connected to a body, no longer focused on people, places, or things in your external environment, and beyond linear time, you're entering the door of the quantum field. You cannot enter as a somebody. You must do so as a nobody. You have to leave the self-centered ego at the door and enter the realm of consciousness as pure consciousness. And as I said in chapter 1, in order to change your body to foster better health, something in your external circumstances, a new job or relationship perhaps, or your timeline toward a possible future reality, you have to become no body, no thing, no time. Thus, here is the grand hint. To change any aspect of your life, body, environment, or time, you must transcend it. You must leave behind the big three in order to control the big three. When we are in creation, we are activating the brain's creative center, the frontal lobe, part of the forebrain and comprising the prefrontal cortex. This is the newest, most evolved part of our human nervous system and the most adaptable part of the brain. Tends to be the creative center of who we are and the brain's CEO or decision-making apparatus. The frontal lobe is the seat of our attention, focus, concentration, awareness, observation, and consciousness. It is where we speculate on possibilities, demonstrate firm intention, make conscious decisions, control impulsive and emotional behaviors, and learn new things. For the sake of our understanding, the frontal lobe performs 3 essential functions. These will all come into play as you learn and practice the how-to meditative steps for breaking the habit of being yourself in part 3 of this book. Number 1, metacognition, becoming self-aware to inhibit unwanted states of mind and body. If you want to create a new self, you first have to stop being the old self. In the process of creation, the first function of the frontal lobe is to become self-aware. Because we have metacognitive capabilities, the power to observe our own thoughts and self, we can decide how we no longer want to be, to think, act, and feel. This ability to self-reflect allows us to scrutinize ourselves and then make a plan to modify our behaviors so that we can produce more enlightened or desirable outcomes. Your attention is where you place your energy. To use attention to empower your life, you will have to examine what you've already created. This is where you begin to know thyself. You look at your beliefs about life, yourself, and others. You are what you are where you are, and you are who you are because of what you believe about yourself. Your beliefs are the thoughts you keep consciously or unconsciously accepting as the law in your life. Whether you are aware of them or not, they still affect your reality. So if you truly want a new personal reality, start observing all aspects of your present personality. Since they primarily operate below the level of conscious awareness, much like automatic software programs, you will have to go within and look at these elements you probably haven't been aware of before. Given that your personality comprises how you think, act, and feel, you must pay attention to your unconscious thoughts, reflexive behaviors, and automatic emotional reactions. Put them under observation to determine if they are true and whether you want to continue to endorse them with your energy. To become familiar with your unconscious states of mind and body takes an act of will, intention, and heightened awareness. If you become more aware, you will become more attentive. If you become more attentive, you will become more conscious. If you grow to be more conscious, you will notice more. If you notice more, you will have a greater ability to observe self and others, both inner and outer elements of your reality. Ultimately, the more you observe, the more you awaken from the state of the unconscious mind into conscious awareness. The purpose of becoming self-aware is so that you no longer allow any thought, action, or emotion you don't want to experience to pass by your awareness. Thus, in time, your ability to consciously inhibit those states of being will stop the same firing and wiring of the old neural networks that are related to the old personality. And as a result of no longer recreating the same mind on a daily basis, you prune away the hardware that is related to the old self. In addition, by interrupting the feelings that are associated with those thoughts, you are no longer signaling genes in the same way. You are stopping the body from reaffirming itself as the same mind. This process is whereby you quite simply begin to lose your mind. So as you develop the skill of becoming familiar with all aspects of your old self, you will ultimately become more conscious. Your goal here is to unlearn who you used to be so that you can free up energy to create a new life, a new personality. You can't create a new personal reality as the same personality. You have to become someone else. Metacognition is your first task in moving from your past to creating a new future.
Okay. So we are going to end this book reading session here because apparently there is still 51 minutes left in chapter 5. So when we come back to chapter 5, if you have the hard copy of the book, it's going to be page 112. And it's going to be on number 2, creating a new mind to think about new ways of being is going to be where we start at in chapter 5, survival versus creation. So there's only a few more pages until we start part 2 of the book, Your Brain and Meditation. So I'm excited about that. So next Monday, we'll go ahead and we'll finish up chapter 5 and we'll start on what we can in part 2. If you all have any questions about what we have read today, please let me know. I will go ahead and post before next Monday, what page, what chapter, all of that good stuff. But I did want to say, and I wanted to say it after the part about the friend who had the cancer and things like that, about how he thought. It was really interesting to me because, we talk so much. Well, I don't know about everybody, but I know that I talk so much about health and, the importance of your health and everything. And just even reading in this book and hearing the things that Dr. Joe Dispenza says, it's like, yes, your health is important, right? But I did not think that because I have an autoimmune disorder, right? So I did not think that the things that I had been through, the stressors that I had in my life had caused the Graves' disease, the hyperthyroid. And I didn't always have hyperthyroid with Graves' disease. So that is the thing that makes me believe that the stress that I was under, the things that I was living in the past affected the way that my future or my present self at that time was going through and having hyperthyroid with Graves' disease. I know when I was around that time that I had found out that I had hyperthyroid with Graves' disease. I had just got married and things like that. but it wasn't from my marriage that I found out that I had hyperthyroid. It was because I was still trying to deal with the fact that back all those years ago when I had my son, that I was abused, and back before even him, like I was still living in the past of the trauma that I had in my life. And a lot of the bigger parts of my life, having an abortion at a young age, being abused at a young age, being married, divorced at a young age, all of those things that I had been through are things that I had not gotten over. Those are things that I had not dealt with in my life. And all of those things, and then, bringing them into a new marriage, adding additional kids, the stresses of working and just everything, just continuing to live in the past, but also building upon the trauma that I had is more than likely what caused the autoimmune diseases that I ended up with, and I can say today that the more and more that I learn about myself, the more and more I heal my traumas and the situations that I have been in, and getting rid of the stressors in my life is, what is helping me as well. But I didn't realize that it was getting rid of those traumas and those stresses that was doing that, as well as, eating right and making sure the right things are in my body. So I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent. I have a meeting tonight, but I do just want to say that, although us health people and nutritionists and all of that stuff, although we are informing you of ingesting the right things, eating healthy, and taking herbs and stuff, nothing will work unless you are not living in the past. It's not going to work as well if you're not healing traumas, if you're not, getting rid of those stressors in your life. And I truly believe that Dr. Joe Dispenza clearly is saying that. And, we have to work on ourselves. I'm not going to say have to, but we should be working on ourselves. We should be, you know, trying to find out what are the things that are keeping me stuck in the place that I'm at in my life. What is the reason that I, ended up with this new disease that I didn't have before? What are the things that I'm doing differently now that I, wasn't doing before? So we have questions to ask ourselves, right? In order to get healthy, change our bodies, our minds, all of that. We have to, we should be looking deeper than what the doctors are telling us, because it's not necessarily what they see, is more so what is inside of us, rooted deep. And it's time to let the trauma go, as Lundrell says. If you don't know what song I'm referencing, go ahead and hit Spotify or YouTube. Let the Trauma Go by Lundrell. All right. Anyway, I hope that you all have a fantastic rest of your evening. I will talk to you all next Monday. Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Dr. Joe Dispenza. Will be getting back into chapter 5 and finishing up chapter 5 and starting on part 2. Okay. I love y'all so much. Have an amazing rest of your evening. Bye.